China's foreign ministry has called on the US not to sell arms to Taiwan, warning that it would harm bilateral relations. There are reports that the US is preparing to sell more than $2 billion worth of tanks and weapons to Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry has confirmed the purchase request and says that it is proceeding with its plan. Our expert joins us to share his insights on this story. Professor Tsang is the director of SOAS China Institute at the University of London. Professor, thank you for joining us. China and Russia, they've agreed to bolster trade ties, and President Xi has described President Putin as his best friend. That's what he said. It's noteworthy that it comes amid these souring relations with the United States, what we've been seeing in the headlines recently. But are we looking at a pivot away from the United States?
I think you are absolutely right. There is, I think, a genuine relationship between Xi Jinping and Putin. But the bigger picture is the real story here. What we are seeing now is that there is an element of a process of decoupling between China and the United States. And in this process, the Chinese government is looking for other friends to support itself in the new era. And here Russia fits in very, very well with what Xi Jinping has in mind. And that is what we are seeing and why this relationship is strengthening.
Now, Prof, you've mentioned about decoupling and they need other friends. What about smaller nations like Singapore, for instance? I mean, is there any way at all for them to, engage with China, Russia, and the US all at once without getting burnt, so to speak?
Now, that I'm sure is what your foreign ministry will try to do, and quite rightly too. The reality will be that if the process of decoupling accelerates, then China and the US will really be trying to get their friends much closer to their side, and staying in the middle, neutral ground, will become much more difficult. So countries like Singapore, which are strategically located and important to both China and the US, may well get caught out.
Professor, we want to get your take on the US intention to sell arms to Taiwan, a sizable number of them. And Washington is pursuing this, even though it is clearly a move that would agitate Beijing. They know that. What's at play here?
Well, the United States does have an obligation under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 to provide enough defensive material for Taiwan to defend itself. Now, given the increasing disparity in military capabilities between China and Taiwan, the amount of arms being sold to Taiwan really is relatively easy to see as defensive for Taiwan. So I don't think there's something fundamentally wrong there. What it shows is that the Trump administration is not worried about antagonizing Beijing, knowing full well that Beijing will react quite strongly to this.
So, Prof, I'm just wondering what implications then does this have for the region? Do you think that countries here might feel pressured, to maybe either just buy US armory or China ones?
I think the pressure would be much more on whether countries here are more supportive of China or the US, not so much in terms of whether they are American arms or Chinese arms. I think the other constraint really will be that for relatively smaller powers and with a smaller budget, you really don't want to have a mix of weapon systems from different countries, because that make them much more difficult to maintain to an efficient operational level. So countries that have historically been buying American arms will stick to Americans, and those buying Chinese will stick to Chinese.
Professor Tsang, let's get your take now on how you feel countries in Asia can position themselves, or if they should be doing, how they can navigate perhaps the Sino-US tensions and come out unscathed. Is that even possible?
Well, since you are based in Singapore, what I would say is that in Southeast Asia, the important thing is to get ASEAN to work together, and collectively ASEAN will give you much more of a scope to maintain your own independent stance rather than simply got caught up between the increasing tension between US and China, which is likely to get worse in the years to come.
All right. Professor Tsang, thank you very much for those perspectives. We've been speaking there to Professor Steve Tsang from the University of London.